Hey there, writers and readers. Jared here. We've got a great episode for you today. But before we get to my chat with Bryan Byrdlong of the University of Michigan, I want to thank you all for tuning in. A longtime listener named SD Downs asked us to cover U of M, and we're happy to be getting to it. If you'd like to request a program for us to feature, you can find our contact info in the show notes and at our website, mfawriters.com, where you can also find links to anything we mention in the show, including our guests' published work, which we highly recommend, of course. I also want to give a shout out to all of our listeners who leave reviews, like Nurse Askarate, who wrote, "The intro music is so chill, it makes me feel like I'm on the porch at the MFA Writers Lair, sipping on hot cider while listening in on the secrets of writing. Steal this podcast. It's great for learning the inner workings of MFA programs, which is super useful if you're trying to get in." Nurse Askarate, thank you, and stay weird, my friend. Big thanks to anyone who leaves a review. It helps new listeners find the show, which helps us grow and continue to demystify MFAs and spread the word about these fantastic emerging writers. Now to the episode, which it may be helpful to know was recorded on January 7th, a day after the embarrassing and disgusting attack on our Capitol in Washington, D.C. To all our listeners, take care, stay strong, be safe, and enjoy the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, a podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Bryan Byrdlong, a Black poet from Chicago, Illinois. In high school, he was part of Chicago's Louder Than a Bomb poetry slam competition. He graduated from Vanderbilt University, where he received an undergraduate English and creative writing degree, and was the co-recipient of the Merrill Moore Award for Poetry upon graduation. He's been published in the Nashville Review, Heavy Feather Review, and Pleiades Magazine. Most recently, he received the Gregory Janikian Scholarship from the Adroit Journal. He's a recent graduate of the Helen Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan and a current Zell Fellow. Bryan has brought 3 poems to read for us today.
Thank you, Jared. The first poem is Undead. Does anyone else, while they're watching the video of the cop shooting the black man, boy, person on the internet, pause the video right before it ends? I do. It doesn't matter if it's the one with Tamir or Oscar. Sometimes right before it gets to the end, I'll stop it, then hit rewind. It's always bizarre witnessing the body rise and the cop retreat, climb back into their car before fleeing in reverse. Likewise, it is strangely beautiful to see the snow unread as the bullet exits the undead body and return into the barrel's black. The boy, man, person now standing, walking. Does anyone else laugh or manage a mischievous smile, imagining the look on death's face? This next poem is called Black Monday. It's sort of after a unfortunately real story of a man in Florida, a black sort of Haitian man who had a psychotic episode and attacked a pedestrian and was shot and killed by the police. Black Monday. They were always going to call Rudy the Miami zombie the same way a white man called me a Monday on a train in Chicago and meant nigger and meant it. His attempt to obscure the slur backfiring, coiled within the code a celestial body bloomed, blossoming at his lips, day of the moon. In Florida, Rudy had seen someone he knew, unstuck their eyes, kissed their face maliciously, been shot and died. Yes, for a time, I too presumed. Too many run-ins with the law, too many stops led to a dead end, led to Rudy complete and nude, waving his Bible to the tune of Traffic, Sonata, Impala, Ram, until a college boy reframed the sin, handsome as a waxing gibbous. For him, a stun gun. For him, a kick to the head. For him, don't shoot, and preternatural strength, compliments to his bear-like scalping the husband's face, and how quickly the wife went unseen in the dark. In a way, I was always an understudy to it, my dad breaking the bathroom door neatly, how the hinges barely bent, popped, a single red dent, a rose on his fist. No justice, just fragments, just a splitting of the veil of the temple above the eyebrow, the deputies entering the house like wise men bearing gifts, two figures in a pool of what would never clot again, one baptized into a rite I cannot comprehend, a contemporary beyond blackness heaped, the Monday, 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 Monday of each month. Rudy, before. I never knew how hard it was to gently close a bathroom door, how difficult it could be to not shatter a man's face, to rename yourself in the midst of grief, embrace again for the coming week. The last poem is Self-Portrait of the Artist as a Zombie. But then again, there's the painting, the graffiti of a zombie in black acrylic on an abandoned building by the old home along with the phrase, still alive. I used to jog by its form mirroring function, its derelict branded on derelict, its meta slowly renovated, transformed from an empty shell into a nest for bees, a brewery with honey, nectar, the tag zombie painted over with white, but still, within, the folks leering as I ran toward home, my mother not knowing if I would return alive in that city, that country, that time, another kind of ruin, threatening to consume me if I stop. In one draft, I do, and the abandoned building turns me into an abandoned building filled with insects. And yet, in the final frame, a boy who looks like me is standing in the doorway, while a woman who resembles my mother jerks her hand away from his face as it returns to her, still alive, but cold.
Thanks, Bryan. That was great. I really appreciate you being here and reading those for us. It's great to have you.
Thank you too, Jared, for the opportunity.
So in each of these poems, you either allude to or directly reference zombies. And I suspect when most people hear the term zombie, they think of The Walking Dead or maybe like the George Romero films, Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. But the idea of the zombie actually comes from Haiti and represents something quite different. So for listeners who don't know, do you mind explaining the zombie of Haitian folklore?
Yeah, I can explain it a bit. So I guess I could qualify a bit. Also, I'm of Haitian descent. My mom is Haitian. Her parents came from Haiti in the 50s. And yeah, while our, I guess, immediate family didn't really have any connection with the, voodoo that sort of the zombie surrounds in Haiti. In sort of the Haitian cultural tradition, the zombie is created by a Bokur, kind of like a witch doctor, and is usually created to do work. The sort of zombie is kind of separate from traditional Haitian voodoo religion, but it is definitely a component of sort of the status unto this day, actually. And it was, originally a commentary, sort of fear from Haiti's colonial beginnings. The colony of Saint-Domingue, people were afraid of being, sold into slavery, the treatment that they received as slaves. And it was, even more grotesque with the idea of the zombie being forced to do labor even after, you passed away. And so that is sort of the feeling and the anxiety that persists with the Haitian conception of the zombie.
You said that your family didn't necessarily have a direct connection to like that voodoo folklore of Haiti, But do you remember the first time that you heard about this idea of the zombie in Haitian folklore? And like, at what point did you start incorporating it into your work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I grew up, of course, in America. I'm from Chicago originally, and I sort of grew up, like many others in America, consuming a lot of American sort of zombie pop culture. The Walking Dead show. The films like 28 Days Later, Shaun of the Dead. The video game Left 4 Dead. I remember. And so it was maybe more so in my teenage years, even college years, that, just by in association of that, I, came to understand the connection with the Haitian folklore of the zombie. So that those two things were sort of swirling around in my head. And it wasn't until, I got into the MFA and had to begin to think about, all right, I'm going to work for some years on a book length project. What am I going to write about? What is my, project going to be that I'm going to research for, really lean into? And I was really curious about following the trajectory. That was the initial word, the trajectory from, the Haitian folklore of the zombie, and how, that becomes, in American films, and even leading, into international films, and international culture.
Well, I mean, Haitians, as you said, they use the zombie as like a metaphor for enslavement. And later in those Romero films that I referenced, he used the zombie as a metaphor for consumerism. But like you said, nowadays zombies are like big business with video games and TV shows and movies. The entertainment industry makes a ton of money on them. I was reading an article in The Atlantic by Mike Mariani, who said that zombies have consumed consumerist culture. So I'm
Hmm.
curious, in today's context, what the zombie represents for you and why you think it inspires your writing so much.
Yeah, I think that consumerism is definitely a big thing that the zombie represents in sort of like in the current international context. I think a lot of people, whatever your anxiety is, you might forecast the zombie on that. So, capitalism can be seen as, something of a zombie entity, in the way that, it consumes sort of, human freedoms in a way, but, other people will put that mark on, like, a lot of the protests that were happening over the summer, unfortunately. For me personally, I do see it along the lines of that consumerism, capitalism context. And I think, a bit of that critique is in poems of my project. But, I also think that the zombie is still a pretty solid metaphor for, the way that the society often treats, Blackness. It's a bit overt, but, there's talks of kind of like a kind of social death, that, prejudice and racism in America gives to Black people. But, contradictorily, Black people are kind of expected to, live in it. So, for me, that is sprung the, kind of undead figure being caught between the threat of being dead, but also the being alive at the same time. On the other hand, there's the threat, of white supremacy. I mean, we saw, it's January 7th now, but we saw yesterday, literally yesterday, the mob, charging the doors, as one might see in more recent zombie films. But, more subtly across history, the theme of assimilation, um, the ways in which, colonial forces have tried to assimilate different kinds of cultures, different kinds of people, is sort of very zombie-esque. And so those broader political themes are in the project. But, more recently, I've also been, trying to get more at, the personal stakes of my speaker, because, it is a thing to reckon with how perhaps personally, I've been at the threat of, some of these assimilation forces and things of that nature. And, that has been good work in the making more recently.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I was going to say, like, you incorporate these Gothic themes and, the idea of the zombie, but you also do it through the lens of like social injustice, which I think is really fascinating. And that idea of assimilation is something I hadn't thought of, but makes complete sense to me. And when I was reading these poems, I started thinking about like Ta-Nehisi Coates' words from Between the World and Me, where he says, in America, it's traditional to destroy the black body. There's that idea of taking control of someone's body. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the current moment and maybe why it lends itself so well, tragically, to these themes that you're exploring.
Yeah, I think the current moment is unfortunately a very kind of overt representation of a lot of underlying forces, sort of in America, definitely, but around the world. The sort of threat to the black body is one of those things. The precarity that black people might be assimilated, might be killed, and the fear that even after your passing, you will not be sort of safe from a kind of attack. And this is a part of the project that I've been trying to work more on. With the advent of the summer protests, the summer pushback after the tragic killing of George Floyd, the people in the streets sort of standing in perhaps for the another part of the zombie, which is a kind of revolutionary push, because also in Haiti, there was the sort of myth of the zombie during colonial slave times, but of course in the history of that country, they were able to wage revolution, and that was a point of fear and anxiety for the individuals, the white plantation owners. And so, there is, I think, a parallel between the definite anxiety I saw over Twitter over the summer, people finally saying, this is enough, taking to the streets in droves, and, spreading the message that, Black lives do matter. And, from the other side, they can maybe paint that as negatively zombie-esque, but the beauty of poetry is that, I can paint that as positively zombie-esque. Maybe not romanticize it in the traditional sense, but do that in a way.
You mentioned the idea of like even taking control of these black bodies after death. I was thinking about Michael Brown. I'm from Missouri, so he's always like, in my mind when I have these conversations. And I remember after his murder, the photos that were used of him online and in the media, taking control of his image and painting a picture of who he was as a person, even after he was gone, in order to push their narrative. So I'm wondering what you're hoping people will take from your poems when they read poems like this and start thinking about these themes. And in the current moment, as people take to the streets and protest for Black lives, what are you hoping they might think about when they read your poem, and what do you hope that they might consider and take away from it?
Well, I've been trying to write some dope poems.
That's the first step, right?
Yeah, so I hope they take that away. But yeah, I hope that they see some truth. I know we're kind of in the era of fake news and alternative facts. I think poetry is a medium that rather uniquely is equipped to maybe cut through some of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that they see truth. I hope that they see themselves a bit, especially if they're, I don't know what you call like a Western audience. But also, if they're Black folk, I hope that, I'm able to, be true to that, even as I'm maybe writing something that, a lot of different people can read. I hope that, they see, the threat. An interesting thing that happens in sort of the trajectory from the the Haitian conception of the zombie to its adoption in American culture and international pop culture. There's a 30s film called White Zombie with the famous Hollywood actor Bela Lugosi, and in the Haitian conception, they're on the island. Black people are the ones being at risk of the zombie. And we can see that parallel to today. But it's interesting, and I don't have like an essay on it or not, but it's interesting because in movies like White Zombie and movies like the George Romero film Night of the Living Dead, the white body becomes at risk of the zombification, and that, like I said, I don't really know what to make of that, and it's probably not equal or equivalent, but it is, there is something there, I think. So I hope that people will see that as the threat that it is, but also glimmers of hope. In the project that I have now, there are perhaps moments of pessimism, but I wouldn't say that it's nihilistic. There's a few just turnings of things, the ability to find beauty in a kind of ruin, um, a, an ability to say that this thing that society deems as ugly is actually beautiful, and yeah, a little bit of the sublime.
Well, I think you made a really interesting point about like living in the era of fake news, where people can present a set of facts in the media, and then other people can say, "I don't think that happened."
Yeah.
And maybe you're right that poetry and writing can cut against that in some way, because it's a lot harder to say your truth is not true or your feelings are not true. If you can represent in your poetry, like you do so well, what it feels like to be Black in America, that's not deniable, right?
Hopefully not. But I think aside from not being deniable, it is something that resonates. I think poetry sort of is language, but it's sort of hacked language, and it touches a bit at a thing that goes beyond language, and I think people sort of feel it, and then when you feel it is true, you sort of know it is true, and it's very hard for words to sort of assail that feeling.
Well, let's rewind a little bit, and I want to talk about your process. So we've been talking about reading your poetry, but I'm curious what your process looks like for actually writing the poetry. If you're thinking about zombies when you sit down to write a poem, or whether
Yeah.
those things work their way in on their own, and just like what your writing process usually looks like.
Yeah, definitely. So usually I'll have a theme. It's like I'm gonna write a poem about family. I'm gonna write a poem about society. or I might have a title like Undead. The poem Undead was the title first, or it'll be nephrastic. So I might be inspired by an actual piece of art, painting, a movie, a video game, or something that happened in the news, like a Google search led me to the Miami zombie story. So I have that sort of impetus, and then I'll have to do the age old question of form versus no form. And so after I made that decision initially, doing a little bit of research, if I want to bring in, different elements, different quotes, different things surrounding the issue. Unfortunately for Undead, that meant, looking again at that video, things of that nature. And so, after I feel like I've gotten enough research for the initial poem, I'll write. And then the trick I learned in MFA, write until, you think you're done, and then go to sleep, and then wake up and then look at the poem with new eyes. And then after you've done that like once at least, then I write to the end until I'm like, all right, that's, I've reached the end of the poem. Like the poem's not done, but, I've reached the end. And then, more recently, I've begun to edit with several voices in mind. And I think that's one of the benefits of an MFA, that you kind of compile different voices of different editors in your head. You could definitely exclude, some that you maybe find problematic or that you don't think are vibing with that current poem or project, but you got it with several voices in mind. And then you sort of have a finished project. But then, after that, you might, of course, engage in revision. And, a technique I learned personally from C.M. Burroughs is the idea of radical revision. And so that might be, if you don't have a form for that first draft, you might try to revise it by adding, a form, like turning it into like a double sonnet or a sonnet or a villanelle or something like that. You might, radically alter the structure, white space, prose poetry, things of that nature. And, you might come out with, an extra dimension of the poem through that. And then, finally, just editing those decisions down. And then, you sort of have, kind of a first draft, maybe a second draft. But, you should have like a poem, and then, you can keep maybe going back to revision and editing until I guess you're ready to show it to the world in some way.
Well, I want to ask you about one thing you said. You said you will edit the poem with various editors' voices in your mind. Could you explain a little bit more, just like what you mean by that? Like, what editors are you thinking about?
Yeah, so that can be workshop leaders. They I think they tend to have certain readings of your work, and so or they have sort of tips about lineation or the ways in which you do line breaks, syntax. And so, you might keep that in mind. And also, for the people who are in your workshop, your cohort, you're kind of looking at their feedback week in, week out, every week. Some of it is written down, so it's sort of reinforced. So you might, think back to what someone said about a similar poem that you wrote, and then look at the decision that you currently have on the page, and wonder if it's really working, wonder if someone who you think is a good reader of your work would be confused about a line or a passage, if they would have questions. And then you can sort of see outside maybe your own bias as a reader, because of course you perhaps know what you mean, know what you're trying to say, but you might not actually be saying it.
That makes sense. And the second poem you read, Black Monday, you told me is still in the process of being revised. So where in the process is it? Is this a first draft? Is this a second draft? Have you started making some edits?
Yeah, I would say this is like a second and a half draft. I had a draft of it initially. I think I brought in a workshop, and then after that, I revised it some to try to send out. But it was actually there was a talk with a visiting author, Patricia Smith. And before that, I had read her book, Incendiary Art, which is a really fantastic book. And, she talks about the power of persona. And, I am, of Haitian descent. And then the man, Rudy, in that story is, Haitian. So I began to wonder about writing instead of, the poem that I had, a more radical revision of a persona poem in which maybe I inhabit that persona. And that could maybe get me a bit closer to, I don't know, something that I think the poem is trying to do now that it doesn't quite do.
Well, speaking of Patricia Smith's work, you told me that one of your passions is studying books of poetry. I'm curious if you could talk about what that usually looks like in practice for you.
Yeah, I think one of the good things about the MFA is, we're kind of like in a book economy for poetry. And so it's a good place to learn how to study books of poetry, especially if you're like trying to write your own project. I think that for that Patricia Smith Incendiary Art book, it was good to sort of see, the balance of traditional form and not traditional form. And also, she deals in that book with a lot of, sort of morose themes in terms of, Black suffering and Blackness in America. A lot of it, to the title Incendiary themes. And so for a project length book, the balance of that as you go through the book, maybe where to institute some breaks in that was really helpful.
Well, you've mentioned a few times the things you've learned from your MFA, so I definitely want to have some time to talk about that and also to talk about your postgraduate fellowship that you're in right now. So let's start with the MFA program. The Helen Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan is a 2-year fully funded program with concentrations in fiction and poetry. It's a tough program to get into. Each year, 10 poets and 12 fiction writers are chosen from an applicant pool of roughly 1,000. According to the website, these students take craft classes and workshops, attend readings, and meet individually with faculty members. So how has your workshop experience been when you were at Zell?
Well, when I was in the program, the workshop experience was, a different level of critical. I'd been in workshops in undergrad and I guess a few workshops in, non-academic spaces. But, they were definitely reading the poems at a different level. And, there was also, I think the number of people made it, that I got different diverse readings. I did my first workshop with Avan Jordan Van, and he has a very film sort of centric eye. I think he sort of has a degree in film studies, and so it was interesting and also very, I think, beneficial to have that sort of eye on the poems, especially in transitions from like interior spaces or interior thoughts to exterior spaces, or like from inside the house to now we're in the field, and what's really what's really going on there, if we need to be in the field and then go into the house, the order of that information. But also learning how to sort of synthesize, and this is especially helpful for political poems, incorporating your personal perhaps details with other information, sort of like, you could be at home, yesterday, and then, juxtapose that with, I don't know, imagery of, what was happening at the Capitol, how to do that well, without going all over the place was, something that I think that our workshop leaders, asked us to look at. And I think that was very helpful.
Well, you mentioned getting a diverse set of eyes on your work. When you say that, are you referring to the faculty members that you're working with, or the students that you're working with, or both? Did you often have like different people in each workshop, or were you taking workshops with some professors more than once, or did you have a lot of the same students reading your work in those workshops?
Yeah, so you can take workshop with professors more than once. You meet with your cohort, like all of you that come in one year, at least one semester a year. So that's good because you kind of get some variation in the other semester, but you also get people who become more familiar with your work. And it was good to have people of different insights because some people wouldn't have the frame of reference maybe to understand a poem, and that's good to know. Maybe your poem isn't necessarily for the frame of reference that they had at that time, but also you have people that do understand, and are able to give you more specific feedback.
So, outside of workshop classes, what types of classes were you taking? Like literature, craft classes? Were you able to do any like independent study with faculty members?
Yeah, so I decided to be kind of take a smorgasbord of classes. I took a sort of English PhD classes about Black death in the media, which that was definitely to my own specific project. I took like a general survey course on kind of like PhD theory in the English department, and that was definitely broadening. And from that, I was able to kind of use that paper in applying to creative PhD programs. So it was, it wasn't just a one-off. It was helpful in that way. But I also took a screenwriting course. So definitely, I felt the ability to engage in more broad study. And I also took an entrepreneurship course, kind of curious, kind of in the intersection of sort of writing and entrepreneurship.
That sounds awesome. Just being able to find like those kind of diverse classes, build some of those skills, and then to be able to find that class that so closely relates to your own work. It sounds like there's a lot of flexibility in the program to kind of take what you want and find like things that might interest you and intersect with your creative work.
Most definitely. And I do know people that did do independent studies, and every semester they do offer craft courses. There was one about documentary poetics that I heard really good things about, although I didn't take it myself.
Well, the program website claims it says we like to think of our endeavor as a communal effort to push back against the darkness of intolerance and injustice, to give voice to those experiences and perspectives that might otherwise be silenced, and to embody and value those practices that speak to the importance of empathy and compassion in the world, which is a really beautiful statement to put on your website. But I'm curious if you think that the program lives up to that statement.
I think I feel like I came at a good time in the program. I think it was definitely living up to that statement more than it had been in the past. I do know, I'm a guy, and I did hear complaints, that there weren't too many Black women, women of color in the department, and that absence was felt, of course. So I think there could be more on that. And, just I think as a consequence of last year, we definitely had our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and that was all nice. But for a lot of institutions, 2020 was the first time we heard the word anti-racism, and that wasn't a word that was or a phrase that was used beforehand. And so, I think now that sort of the cat's out of the bag, I would be hopeful that more sort of anti-racism is incorporated. And it's not maybe too much of a harp on the program. That term probably came into common use for a lot of people just last year. But I think that the anti-racism perspective would help with things such as hiring and retaining a bit more diverse Black women, talent, and leadership in the program.
Well, it's something that I think we all need to push for in this industry in general and MFA programs across the country. It sounds like your feeling is that the program's heading in the right direction in that sense, and you felt pretty well supported in your time there.
I did. It could be a point of contrast. I worked sort of in the corporate world before I came to the program, so it might have felt that it was just a bit more, community oriented than that. But that might not be saying much. But I felt supported. But I think that the program could do more to make everyone feel like I felt. And I think it does have the opportunity, and the mandate now to do more. And I hope that it does as I prepare to leave.
Well, I wanted to talk about a few of the unique parts of the program. I was, poking around on the website, and I saw that there's an MFA exam that's required at the end of the first year, which isn't particularly common in MFA programs. So I was wondering if you could tell us about that and like what that entails.
Yeah. So from what I'm told, that there used to be like a language requirement, like you had to, show aptitude in a different language, and they decided to replace that with the MFA exam. I guess they felt it was, more in tune with this study of actually poetry and prose to, have you read Anna Karenina or, Langston Hughes and then, write some essays on it than not. So yeah, you are given a reading list over the summer before your first year. It's pretty extensive. There's a lot of maybe older, more quote unquote canon poetry, but there's some contemporary works there too. Your Frank O'Hara, of course Shakespeare, but then there's also some craft essays. And so I guess the idea is, you read most of the poetry and most of the craft essays, and you have knowledge of them, and you have knowledge of them enough that you're able to write several essays over the course of a weekend, and then you print it out, and then you seal it, and then you turn it in, and then it's pretty much pass fail. It's very hard to fail. Yeah, you have a little bit more poetry knowledge in your pocket.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm understanding is they give you like a list of literature that you read, and then towards the end of your first year, you have like an essay test that you take and then return to them.
Yes, that's correct.
So is that reading list, is that different for each student, or is it like all poetry students have the same reading list? All fiction students have the same reading list?
Yeah, all poetry and fiction students have the same reading list. It changes usually every year, but yeah, in your year, all would be the same.
And the program also has an acclaimed visiting writers series that brings more than a dozen poets and fiction writers to campus every year, at least pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Who were some of your favorite visiting writers that came during your time?
I definitely enjoyed Patricia Smith. I got to ask her questions. That was a great experience, also because she is also from Chicago. Really enjoyed Ilya Kaminsky's visit. Just his book, Deaf Republic, was phenomenal, and it was great to hear him read those poems and sort of speak on them. And then, I really enjoyed Shane McCrae. Some of the visiting writers are able to give feedback on work, and I think I got really good feedback on some drafts from him, and I was able to interview him for the Michigan Quarterly Review, and that was a really fun and informative interview.
So you said like you got some feedback. Like, so when these visiting writers come, some of them will actually read your work and like sit down with you and talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, it's really good to get insight outside of the program as well.
I think that's a good point because sometimes with MFA programs you have a fairly small cohort. You kind of, it can become a bit of a vacuum. So it's nice to have someone from the outside come in and provide like a outside perspective. And then you also mentioned the Michigan Quarterly Review. I was looking on the website, and it says that there are a lot of opportunities in the community and to participate in various literary organizations and events. And Michigan Quarterly Review is one that was mentioned along with 826 Michigan and the Fiction Writers Review. So maybe you can tell us a bit about the Michigan Quarterly Review and any other opportunities you took advantage of while you're in the program.
So Michigan Quarterly Review turned 60 this year. They read for poetry, fiction and nonfiction, and produce a quarterly issue. I was a reader from first year to second year, and that was really good experience to be kind of part of the other side of the submission process. You also sort of hone your eye as a reader, just reading through all of the different kind of work that people send in. So that was a really good opportunity, and they're good enough to pay you for it. Not too much, but definitely some coffee money. And then a big part was Inside Out. Inside Out, Detroit. There was a fellowship through the program to go co-teach with another MFA student in a Detroit area school. And that was kind of a formative, a big part of writing and poetry and fiction and academia is definitely pedagogy. A lot of writers, also teach, and so it was good to be able to, that was at least my first time teaching period, and so honing that skill and being able to do it to young people was rewarding, and something I definitely really am glad that I was able to do at the program.
Well, it's cool that you have chances through the program to connect with the community, like the greater literary community. How was the community in the MFA program and around the area?
The community in the MFA program was good. I think every cohort is different. My cohort was fortunately pretty tight as sort of poets go. And yeah, we went to each other's readings. We went to get drinks afterwards. People held events in their homes that they invited a lot of people to. It was nice to engage in kind of a more social writerly community. Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm from Chicago, which I think I've mentioned a lot in this interview. But Ann Arbor is a little small for me. It has enough, and the University of Michigan is like really big, so it helps it feel bigger. But I feel like if you come from a big city, big town, Ann Arbor might be a little small for you, but it has enough. It has places to go. It has little events. And then Detroit, is kind of not too far away. So, there's definitely time and space if you need to, go into the city and, explore and see some new things and maybe experience more diversity than in Ann Arbor.
Well, after graduating from the program, there's this third-year residency that's available to some students, and you're currently one of those fellows. So can you just tell us about that fellowship and what it entails?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, you have time to write, which is great, especially, given last year, felt very grateful for that. And you also kind of have time to plan your next move. Some people that I know who were Zells went, back to work. Afterwards, some people went to, grad school, PhD, or, some other concentration. You have time to apply for different fellowships. And you also have a community service project about 4 hours a week that you have to do just to sort of give back. And mine is just sort of with MQR, me and my co-editor, we are compiling a short kind of mini issue of the MQR called the MQR mixtape. And, that's been fun.
So is this an opportunity that's available to anyone who graduates from the program, or are there like a limited number of spots available for the fellowship?
I think, right now it's available to everyone. Historically, that hasn't been the case, and I'm not sure what the future holds. But I know as of now, is available to all students who graduate.
Cool. And you mentioned that it kind of provides you time to plot out your next move. Do you have a sense of your next move yet?
Unfortunately, yes and no. So, I applied to like a lot of stuff, but you never know what you're going to get.
PhD programs?
Yeah, I applied to a creative PhD program, a couple of teaching fellowships, a couple of writing fellowships. So, fingers crossed on those. Hopefully I get those. But there's a lot of competition for that. So we'll see.
Well, I'm hoping you get something, and I bet you do, because your poetry's, really moving. I was trying to hold it together while you were reading it today. I think just all the events from yesterday, and it's just a lot on all of our minds right now. So it's really great stuff and really moving stuff. So I wish you nothing but the best. But before we go, I just want to give you the last word. If you have any advice for people considering MFA programs or young poets, any advice you have that you want to tell the listeners?
Yeah, I would say, MFA programs can be great. It's definitely, I don't think, worth going into debt over. So if you find a program that, pays the way for you, I would definitely take it. But, I don't think that, unfortunately, we live in the digital age. And so a lot of the resources are available to you at much less cost. And, I would say that the biggest thing that the MFA can teach you, is to, the privilege, but also the view of yourself as a professional writer, someone who kind of goes at it every day, trying to hone their craft, trying to work on their poems, trying to work on their book project, chapbook project, visual book projects. And so, if you, have the space in your own life to do that, definitely do that. But, that's an important part of, getting your craft to the place where it wants to be. And, I think the final thing is whether you get into a program or not, you have your voice. And, sometimes programs can, try to, shake that voice or interrogate it. But, be confident in that voice and just, allow, the work that you're doing on your own, to maybe hone that voice and, amplify it, but, you don't have to get rid of it.
Well, Bryan, like I said, I wish you nothing but the best, and thank you so much for stopping in and chatting with me for a bit.
Yeah, of course. And thank you, Jared, for this space for MFA students.